Story 1. The Whispering Walls. Sarah had fallen in love with the house the moment she stepped inside. White painted walls, smooth hardwood floors, and the faint smell of fresh plaster gave it the feeling of new beginnings. After years of renting cramped apartments, she and her husband, Daniel, finally had a place to call their own. It wasn't large, but it was theirs, a two-story home tucked into a quiet cul-de-sac, where the only sounds were birds and the occasional bark of a neighbor's dog. On their first evening, boxes still unopened, Sarah stood in the living room and smiled. "It feels perfect, doesn't it?" she asked. Daniel grinned back. "Almost too perfect." He set down a box labeled kitchen and stretched his arms. "This is it, Sarah. Our future starts here." They celebrated with takeout, sitting cross-legged on the floor. As night fell, the house grew still. No creaking pipes, no city traffic, no neighbors stomping overhead, just silence. But later, as Sarah drifted to sleep, she stirred at the faintest sound. It was soft, muffled like a voice carried through fabric. She opened her eyes, listening. Daniel's steady breathing told her he was asleep beside her. The sound came again, distant but clear enough to recognize as whispering. She sat up, heart racing. "Daniel," she whispered, nudging him. He stirred groggily. "What? Do you hear that?" They both listened. The room was still. After a long pause, he groaned, rolled over, and muttered, "Old pipes, go back to sleep." Sarah tried, but the unease clung to her. The whisper had been real. She was sure of it. Over the next week, life settled into routine and packing, arranging furniture, introducing themselves to neighbors. The house seemed ordinary in daylight, even cheerful. But at night, Sarah's unease returned. Lying in bed, she heard it again, voices drifting through the walls. Not just one this time, but several, their tones hushed and urgent. Sometimes they murmured words she couldn't understand. Other times they seemed to call her name, Sarah, drawn out in a voice not her own. One night she shook Daniel awake again. "Listen, please, just listen." He sighed, but as the whispers swelled, even he sat up. His expression tightened. "You're right, I hear it." They searched the house top to bottom, checking windows, closets, even the attic. Nothing. Daniel laughed nervously. Sound travels weird in old houses, maybe neighbors, but their nearest neighbor lived 50 yards away. They tried recording the whispers with Daniel's phone. Each time the playback was the same. Silence, punctuated only by static. Sarah grew more restless. She slept little, often wandering the dark halls, pressing her ear to the walls. She swore she could feel vibrations under the wallpaper, as though someone was speaking directly through it. Daniel began avoiding the subject, but she saw the fatigue in his face. He heard it too, he just didn't want to admit it. One night, the whispers grew stronger than ever. A storm raged outside, rattling the windows. The lights flickered and finally went out. In the darkness, the voices swelled until they filled every corner of the house. "Do you hear them?" Sarah whispered, clutching Daniel's arm. "Yes," he said hoarsely. "God, yes." The whispers turned into a chant, low, rhythmic, insistent. "Get out, get out, get out." The walls trembled, plaster cracked in thin lines, dust raining down. Sarah stumbled forward, frantically tearing at the wallpaper in the hallway. Beneath it, the plaster was covered in carvings. Names, dozens of them, scratched deep into the wall edge with dates beside them, spanning decades. Her breath caught when she saw the last one. It read, "Sarah and Daniel move in 2025. The whispering stopped. Silence hung heavy. Daniel pulled her back. "We're leaving now." They grabbed what they could and fled into the storm, not stopping until they reached the safety of a motel several miles away. The next morning, shaken but desperate for answers, they returned to the house in daylight. The walls were smooth again, the wallpaper intact, no carvings visible. Daniel searched every inch, even peeling back the paper where Sarah swore she had seen the names. Nothing. The realtor, when confronted, only smiled politely. "Some houses take time to adjust to, but if you really feel uncomfortable, I can help you list it again. Just so you know, none of the previous owners stayed very long either." That was all she would say. Sarah and Daniel never spent another night there. They sold the house at a loss and moved into a small apartment. The relief of leaving was instant, though the questions lingered. What had been scratching inside those walls? Why their names? A month later, Daniel was working late when his phone buzzed. A voicemail notification. He pressed play, expecting a client. At first it was only static, then, faintly, A whisper. Daniel, his stomach dropped. The whispers swelled, the same chant that had driven them from the house. Get out, get out. The voicemail ended abruptly. Daniel stared at the screen. The call had come from their old house, number the landline they'd disconnected weeks ago. Story to the basement door that wouldn't stay shut. The house had seemed like a steal. For college friends Avon, Rachel, Marcus, and Jess pooled their money to rent a sprawling old property just off campus. It was too big for them, with wide hallways, drafty windows, and a yard that would be impossible to maintain. But the rent was suspiciously cheap. When the landlord handed them the keys, he made one request. Don't use the basement, he said flatly. The stairs are unsafe. Doors locked anyway. They laughed about it on Movin' Day, dragging boxes past the heavy wooden basement door at the end of the hall. It looked ancient, its brass knob tarnished, its hinges black with rust. Marcus even joked about it being the classic horror movie setup. Don't open the basement or you'll regret it. For the first week, everything was normal. Classes, parties, late-night gaming marathons. But then Rachel noticed something strange. One morning, as she shuffled down the hall half awake, she saw the basement door cracked open. The others swore they hadn't touched it. Evan pushed it shut, jiggled the knob, and confirmed it was locked. They shrugged it off, maybe the lock was loose. The next morning, it was open again. At first it was almost funny. They made jokes about the ghost roommate leaving it open, teasing each other about sneaking into the basement. But the humor faded quickly. A week in, a foul odor began to drift upstairs. It was faint at first, like damp wood. Soon it thickened into something sour mixed with something metallic, like old blood. No matter how many candles Rachel burned or windows Jess opened, the smell lingered, seeping into their clothes, their hair. Then came the noises. At night, when the house was dark and the four of them lay in their rooms, they heard footsteps rising from the basement. Slow, deliberate creaks on the wooden stairs, always stopping just at the door. Jess, the skeptic of the group, tried to rationalize it. It's a raccoon or something. Houses like this always have pests. But one night, Evan pressed his ear to the door and swore he heard breathing on the other side. Wet, rasping breaths that matched the rhythm of his own until he staggered back in panic. They nailed the door shut after that. Marcus hammered long nails across the frame, wood groaning with each strike. The four of them stood back, proud of their barricade. But the next morning, the nails lay bent on the floor. The door cracked open again. Fear settled thickly in the house after that. They began to dread nightfall. The footsteps grew bolder, the creaking rising higher, as though someone or something was pressing against the door. Rachel covered her ears with pillows, but it didn't stop her from hearing it. One evening, Evan woke Rachel and Marcus. His face was pale, his hands trembling. I saw it, he whispered. Saw what? Rachel asked, though her voice shook. He pointed at the door. There was a hand, white as chalk. It was pulling back through the crack when I looked. They searched, though none of them dared to open the door wide. The crack revealed only darkness, thick and absolute, swallowing the beam of their flashlights. The breaking point came during a storm. Wind rattled the old house, rain hammered the windows, and lightning lit up the hall in jagged bursts. Suddenly, the basement door slammed open on its own. The sound echoed through the house, sharp and violent. Jess screamed. Marcus grabbed the flashlight, but the beam flickered weakly in the storm's chaos. They huddled together, staring into the basement's mouth. The stench was overwhelming, gnarret and mildew thick enough to gag them. Then came the breathing, heavy, wet inhalations rising from below, and something else movement, scraping, the shuffle of countless feet on stone. Evan stepped forward, clutching the flashlight. We can't keep pretending, he began. But before he could finish, something seized his ankle. He screamed as he was yanked off his feet, dragged violently down the stairs. The flashlight flew from his hand, clattering against the wall before tumbling into the blackness below. Its beam rolled wildly, illuminating glimpses of the basement floor, shining eyes, dozens of them, reflecting the light like animals in the dark. The others rushed forward, but the door slammed shut before they reached it. Evan's screams cut off instantly. They pounded on the door, sobbing, screaming his name. Nothing. Silence pressed back, heavier than before. The police arrived an hour later. They searched the basement top to bottom but found nothing, just old concrete, cobwebs, and dust. No sign of Evan, no footprints, not even the flashlight. The official report labeled him a missing person. The three who remained lasted only days before moving out. They refused to spend another night in the house, leaving their belongings behind. The landlord, expression unreadable, simply changed the locks and put the house back on the market. Rachel still dreams about that night. She wakes to the echo of Evan's scream, the image of pale eyes staring from the dark. Sometimes, when she's alone, she hears a knock-soft rhythmic like fingers tapping wood. In her dreams, the sound always comes from a door she cannot keep shut, and just once she swore she heard a voice behind it. Evan's voice, whispering through the crack. Story 3, The Child in the Attic Window. When Mark and Elaine bought the old farmhouse, they thought it was the perfect place to raise their children. After years in a cramped apartment, the idea of wide fields, fresh air, and quiet evenings appealed to them both. The house was over a century old but solid white clapboard siding, a wraparound porch, and an attic window that looked out over the fields. Their daughter, Lily, was the first to notice something unusual. On their second evening in the house, as Mark carried the last box from the truck, Lily stood in the yard staring up. "Who's that girl?" she asked. Mark followed her gaze. The attic window glinted in the sunset, empty. "What girl?" "The one in the window," Lily said, frowning. "She waved at me." Mark chuckled and ruffled her hair. "No one's up there, sweet pea. The attic's locked." Lily didn't argue, but that night she told her mother about the girl again. Elaine brushed it off as imagination. Lily was 6, after all, with an active mind. But over the next week, Lily mentioned her more and more. "She says her name is Emily," Lily said at breakfast one morning. "She wants to play with me." Elaine stiffened. "And when do you see her?" Lily spooned cereal into her mouth casually. "At night, in the window." By the second week, strange things began happening. Elaine heard footsteps above their bedroom at night, light and quick, like a child running. Mark dismissed it as raccoons, but when he checked the roof there were no signs of animals. One afternoon, Elaine found Lily sitting in the hallway, whispering toward the ceiling. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Talking to Emily. She's funny." Elaine's stomach tightened. "Sweetheart, Emily isn't real." Lily gave her a pitying look, as though her mother simply didn't understand. "She is. She told me her daddy locked her in the attic because she was bad. She doesn't like the dark." Elaine couldn't sleep that night. The next morning, she and Mark hauled a ladder to the attic hatch. The key the realtor had given them didn't fit, so Mark forced the lock with a crowbar. Dust rained down as the door creaked open. The attic was dim and stale, smelling of mold and wood rot. Old furniture and boxes lined the walls, draped in yellowing sheets. In one corner sat a small iron bed frame, its mattress collapsed inward. Beside it lay a cracked porcelain doll. Elaine shivered, creepy but nothing unusual. Then she noticed the walls. They were scratched. Long, shallow grooves covered the plaster, clustered near the bed. Some were shapes that resembled letters, others just frantic claw marks. She leaned closer, squinting. Among the scratches, one message repeated again and again, "Let me out." They didn't tell Lily what they'd seen. They locked the attic again, but it made no difference. Over the next week, Lily's behavior changed. She stopped playing with her toys and instead spent hours drawing the same picture. 2 girls holding hands in front of the attic window. One girl was herself, the other was pale, barefoot, with black scribbles for eyes. Mark suggested a therapist. Elaine wanted to move, but money was tight. They'd sunk everything into the farmhouse. They told themselves Lily would outgrow it. Then one night Elaine woke to silence so heavy it pressed against her ears. She glanced at the clock. 3:12 a.m. The sound of footsteps drifted from above, not the scurry of animals, but the steady tread of a child's feet. Elaine shook Mark awake. He grabbed a flashlight and climbed the ladder to the attic. The lock was once again broken. The door creaked open, revealing the same dust and shadows. But the bed had been moved. It now sat directly under the window, and on the bed lay the porcelain doll propped upright, its cracked face turned toward them. Mark swore under his breath, dropped the flashlight, and slammed the door shut. That night, Lily disappeared. They searched the house frantically, tearing through closets, under beds, the yard, the fields. No sign of her. Elaine's heart stopped when she glanced up. The attic window was open, the curtains fluttered in the night breeze, and there, for the briefest moment, she saw her daughter standing beside another girl. Both of them waved. By the time Mark forced the attic door open, it was empty. Only the doll remained, sitting neatly on the bed with its cracked smile. The police scoured the property. Cadaver dogs, search parties, detectives. They found no trace of Lily. The case remained open for months, then years, before quietly fading into cold storage. Mark and Elaine moved away, hollowed by grief. The farmhouse was eventually resold. Families came and went, never staying long. Neighbors whispered about the place, about the crying they sometimes heard at night, the faint laughter of children carried on the wind. One spring afternoon, a new family moved in. As they unloaded boxes, their youngest son pointed toward the top of the house. "Look, Mommy," he said, tugging her sleeve. "Two girls are waving from the window." The mother glanced up. The attic curtains swayed gently, but the window itself was empty.
Story for the house that changed overnight. Peter had never believed in haunted houses. When he signed the lease on the townhouse, he told himself he was lucky. It was modern, sleek, and strangely affordable for the neighborhood. The walls gleamed white, the windows were large, and the staircase wound neatly up to the second floor. Everything was in its place, neat and orderly, the kind of home where nothing could go wrong. For the first 2 nights, everything was fine. He unpacked, cooked, and scrolled on his phone late into the evening. The silence of living alone was new but comforting. On the 3rd morning, he noticed something odd. The staircase looked different, steeper, narrower somehow. He frowned, rubbed his eyes, and laughed. He must have been imagining it. But when he went to bed that night, he found himself miscounting the steps. The night before, there had been 12. Now there were 13. He told himself he was mistaken, but a prickling unease settled in his stomach. By the end of the week, the house began to betray him. Doors opened into hallways that hadn't been there the day before. His bathroom door, once directly opposite the bedroom, now led to a narrow passage that turned sharply before ending at the sink. He tried to convince himself it was just his memory, but he'd drawn a quick sketch of the floor plan when arranging furniture. Now the sketch no longer matched the reality around him. The kitchen cabinets began to rearrange themselves. One night the plates were above the sink. The next morning, the same cupboard was empty, and the plates waited neatly stacked above the refrigerator. Peter bought a notebook. Every night before bed, he sketched the layout of the house. Every morning, he compared. And every morning, the house was different. Soon, the mirrors started lying. He would glance at the mirror in the upstairs hallway and see himself as expected X. The reflection of the hallway stretched further than the real one. He would turn, look behind him, and see only the wall. But in the glass, doors lined the impossible corridor, stretching into shadow. He stopped looking into mirrors after that. By the 2nd month, the house had become a maze. Some mornings, his front door opened not to the street, but to another hallway, sometimes short, sometimes endless. He learned not to step through when that happened. Once, curiosity got the better of him, and he walked for nearly an hour before finding himself back at his kitchen. It was then he began to hear the footsteps. At first they were faint, as if someone else lived upstairs. But when he searched, every room was empty. The sound grew bolder, echoing down the stairwell. When he stood in the living room, heavy, quick steps, always retreating when he followed. The notebook became his obsession. He filled page after page with maps, arrows, and notes. But no 2 pages ever looked the same. Sometimes even his handwriting seemed altered, slanting forward or looping strangely, as though someone else had written it. One morning, Peter woke to find every window bricked up. The rooms glowed with dim gray light from no visible source. His stomach knotted. He tried the front door. It opened into a hallway he'd never seen before, long, stretching on and on, lined with doors. He stepped forward, calling out. His voice echoed endlessly. The door shut behind him with a final click. Panic clawed at him. He tried each door, but all were locked. The hallway stretched on forever, his footsteps echoing in rhythm with something else's footsteps following behind him, closing in no matter how fast he walked. "Hello," he called, his voice breaking. "Who's there?" The answer came not as words, but as the sound of breath. Close, hot, against the back of his neck. He spun around. Nothing. The hallway was empty, but it was narrower now. The walls pressed closer, inch by inch, as if the house itself were closing around him. He ran. He didn't know for how long. His legs burned, his lungs ached, but the hallway stretched endlessly. Finally, one of the doors swung open ahead of him. Desperate, he threw himself through. He stumbled into his own kitchen. At first, relief washed over him. The walls, the sink, the counter, everything familiar. But the longer he looked, the more he realized something was off. The angles were slightly wrong, the colors dimmer, the air heavier. On the kitchen table sat his notebook. It was open to a fresh page. In thick black ink, words sprawled across the paper. "The house is almost finished with me." His hand trembled as he touched the pen lying beside it. He hadn't written those words. Peter never showed up to work the next day, or the day after. Neighbors assumed he'd left town. Eventually, his landlord repossessed the townhouse. When the next tenant moved in, she found a notebook sitting in the kitchen drawer, page after page of floor plans, written in hurried, slanting handwriting. The last page was blank, at least at first. But the next morning, when she flipped it open again, new words had appeared. "Welcome home."
Story 5, the room they never saw before. When Emma and Luke bought the Victorian house, they thought they had discovered a hidden gem. The house stood tall and regal with gabled roofs, stained glass windows, and a wraparound porch. Inside, ornate wooden trim lined the staircases and ceilings, and the scent of age lingered in every room. They planned to restore it piece by piece, to turn the dusty relic into their dream home. On their first tour, they counted 6 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, and a study. Luke loved the study most of all, with its tall shelves and heavy oak desk. Against the back wall stood an enormous wardrobe, its wood darkened with time. "This will be my reading room," Luke said, grinning. Emma laughed. "As long as you don't disappear into that wardrobe." They never thought twice about it again. For months, they settled into life in the old house. Days were spent sanding floors, painting walls, and hauling debris out to the curb. At night, they collapsed into bed, tired but happy. It wasn't until autumn, during renovations, that they discovered the door. Luke had finally decided to move the wardrobe, grumbling about how heavy it was. With Emma pushing at one side and Luke dragging from the other, they managed to shift it away from the wall. Dust clouded the air. Behind the wardrobe, half hidden by shadows, was a door. Emma froze. "Luke, did you know this was here?" "No," he said, his voice hushed. "It's not on the floor plan." The door was narrow and old, its paint flaking. A rusted keyhole gaped at them. Luke fetched the ring of antique keys the realtor had given them. One slid in perfectly. The lock clicked open. The room beyond took their breath away. Unlike the rest of the house, it wasn't dusty or neglected. It looked preserved and touched by time. A bed with a neatly tucked quilt sat against one wall. A dresser gleamed, its mirror spotless. Curtains hung fresh at the window, swaying slightly though the air was still. "It looks like someone lives here," Emma whispered. "But no one has," Luke said, stepping inside. His footsteps echoed oddly, as though the room were deeper than it appeared. From that night forward, things began to change. At first it was small things. The bedspread in the hidden room would be wrinkled, though neither of them touched it. Emma swore she heard the bed creak at night, as if someone sat down. Luke grew defensive when she mentioned it. It's just in your head. Old houses make noises, but she noticed other things. Scratches on Luke's arms when he woke, long thin marks that looked like fingernails. A smell in the air sometimes, faint but unmistakable cologne, musky and old-fashioned. One evening she found Luke standing in the hidden room, staring at the mirror. "What are you doing?" she asked. He blinked, startled. I thought I saw someone standing behind me." The more time Luke spent in the room, the more distant he became. He'd sit on the bed for hours, unresponsive, eyes fixed on the mirror. Emma begged him to stop, but he only smiled faintly. "He likes me," Luke said once. Emma felt her stomach twist. The man in the mirror. That night, Emma woke alone. Panic surged through her chest. She searched every room until she reached the hidden door. It stood open. Inside, Luke stood stiffly at the window, staring out into the dark yard. The room was ice cold. "Luke," she whispered, stepping closer, "come to bed." His head turned slowly. His eyes were glassy, unfocused. His lips moved, but the voice that came out wasn't his. "She can stay." "You cannot." Emma froze. What are you talking about?" Luke smiled faintly. "He wants me to stay." Before she could move, the door slammed shut behind her. The air thickened. Shadows stretched across the walls, rising like smoke, curling toward her. Emma screamed, pulling at the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. Behind her, Luke reached out a hand not to her, but to something in the mirror. She stumbled backward, heart pounding, as the reflection warped. A tall, dark figure stood in the glass, faceless, its hand pressed against Luke's. The last thing she remembered was the mirror shattering outward, shards raining down like teeth. When the neighbors grew suspicious of the silence, the police were called. Inside, the house was empty, furniture in place, no signs of struggle. The only thing out of place was the study, where the wardrobe once stood. Behind it, a door led into an ordinary, dust-choked storage closet. No sign of a bedroom, no sign of Emma or Luke. Months later, the realtor listed the property again. She wrote in the advertisement, 6 bedrooms, 3 baths, spacious study. When the new owners moved in, they remarked to the realtor that the listing must have been wrong. "There are 7 bedrooms," the husband said. "We counted them." The realtor frowned. 7. "Yes," the wife confirmed. "There's a small one tucked behind the study, with a bed and dresser. Almost like it was waiting for us." That night, as they unpacked, the wife glanced up at the window of the hidden room. The curtain swayed, though no breeze blew, and in the glass she thought she saw a figure tall and faceless waiting patiently.